Hello to all of my treasure hunters. We are having another storage unit auction story today, so grab some snacks, drinks, sit comfortably, we're getting started. Arthur is 72-year-old and he has lived his entire life in Philadelphia. If you looked at his hands, you would see the story of his career. For 40 years, Arthur worked as a master restorer of antique metal and museum-grade safes. His calloused fingers knew the internal mechanism of massive bank vaults, complex combinations, and ironwork that had survived for centuries. He was a man who spent his life protecting and unlocking the most valuable things in the world, but today those same hands sometimes shake when he stands at the grocery store checkout, carefully counting out exact change for milk and bread. Arthur lives in a modest, cramped apartment on a fixed income. He doesn't complain because men of his generation rarely do. But his heart breaks for his daughter, Emily. Emily is a hardworking single mother doing everything in her power to keep her family afloat. She works two exhausting jobs, getting up before the sun and coming home long after it sets, just to pay the rent and help put her own daughter, Arthur's granddaughter, through medical school. Emily is fiercely proud and never asks for a dime. But one humid evening in May of 2026, Arthur was visiting Emily's apartment and heard something that shattered him. He was sitting in the living room when he heard Emily crying quietly in the kitchen. She was on the phone, pleading with bank representative. Her daughter's latest student loan application had been firmly rejected. The tuition deadline was approaching, and they were completely out of options. Sitting in his armchair, Arthur felt a sharp, agonizing pain in the chest. It wasn't a medical issue, it was the heavy, suffocating feeling of total helplessness. He was a master locksmith. He had spent his entire life cracking the most complex, impossible locks ever engineered by man, yet, sitting in the living room, he felt like a rusted, broken lock himself, useless, jammed, and completely unable to open a door for the people he loved most. Arthur decided right then that he would not sit quietly and watch his family drown. The next morning, he walked down to his local bank branch. He approached the teller and withdrew exactly $500 in cash. It was his absolute last safety net. It was the money he had been quietly hiding away in a savings account to pay for his own funeral. He didn't go to a casino and he didn't buy lottery tickets. Arthur relied on the only thing he knew he had ever trusted: his own two hands. He drove to a massive commercial storage facility on the outskirts of Philadelphia that was holding a public auction for abandoned units. The crowd was full of loud, aggressive buyers in their 20s and 30s holding flashlights and treating the auction like a reality television show. Arthur stood quietly in the back, wearing his old canvas work jacket. When the auctioneer rolled up the metal door to Unit 114, the entire crowd groaned. A few of the younger buyers actually burst out laughing. The unit was completely empty, except for one massive, incredibly ugly object sitting dead center on the concrete floor. It was a giant, heavy wooden crate, completely bound in thick, rusted iron bands. It looked like an archaic industrial refrigerator. "Who wants to pay to haul away 1,000 pounds of garbage?" one of the buyers joked. The auctioneer asked for an opening bid, but the crowd just shook their heads. Nobody wanted to deal with the logistics of moving a massive, worthless wooden box. But Arthur wasn't laughing. He stepped closer to the threshold and stared at the heavy steel bands and the specific pattern of the thick iron rivets holding the wood together. His professional mind immediately clicked into gear. He knew exactly what this was. Back in the late 80s, these specific, heavily reinforced crates were custom built for one very specific purpose: transporting high-value assets and delicate historical artifacts between government archives and private bank vaults. Arthur looked at the bottom of the crate. He saw the way the thick wooden pallets beneath it were bowing slightly. He calculated the density. That crate weighed at least 800 pounds. It wasn't full of empty air or old clothes. $350, Arthur said. The crowd went completely silent and turned to look at the old man. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was dead steady. The auctioneer didn't even wait for a counter offer. He pointed his hammer at Arthur and yelled, "Sold." Arthur didn't have a truck, but he knew how to talk to working men. He drove down to a local auto repair shop where he had been getting his oil changed for 20 years. For $50 and a cold case of beer, two of the young mechanics brought a heavy-duty flatbed trailer and hydraulic engine hoist to the storage facility. They managed to load the massive iron-bound crate and carefully drop it right into the center of Arthur's dusty, detached garage. When the mechanics left, Arthur was entirely alone. The Philadelphia heat was sweating inside the garage, but Arthur didn't even notice. He grabbed a heavy pry bar and a hammer from his old workbench. It took him 40 minutes of grueling, exhausting physical labor to finally break the rusted iron seals and pry the heavy wooden lid off the top of the crate. Beneath the lid, he found a thick layer of yellowed industrial protective wax and heavy flannel packing blankets. He carefully peeled the blankets back. Inside were dozens of heavy, intricate iron casting molds. They were beautiful, historical architectural molds used decades ago for restoring the facades of old government buildings and the United States Capitol. It was a fascinating piece of history, but it wasn't going to pay for medical school. However, Arthur wasn't disappointed. 30 years of cracking walls had taught him how professional carriers thought. The heavy iron molds were legitimate, but they were also the perfect legal cover. They were a heavy, plausible decoy to justify the massive weight of the crate if it was ever inspected. Arthur walked over to his old, battered leather tool bag. He reached past the wrenches and screwdrivers and pulled out a medical stethoscope. It was the exact same tool he had used for decades to listen to the microscopic clicks of the tumblers inside bank safes. He placed the earpieces in his ears and pressed the cold metal disc against the thick, wooden exterior side of the crate. He took a small rubber mallet in his right hand and began to tap the wood. Moving down inch by painstaking inch, he wasn't looking for a solid sound. He was listening for a very specific hollow acoustic echo. He tapped his way down the inside, his eyes closed in deep concentration. Halfway down, it sounded solid, 3/4 down, solid, but right at the very bottom right corner, just inches from the concrete floor of the garage, the acoustic pitch suddenly changed. It was a dull, hollow thud, a hidden void. Arthur dropped to his knees on the hard concrete. He took off the stethoscope and ran his bare, calloused fingers over the thick iron banding wrapping around the bottom of the box. He felt dozens of heavy rivets, but his thumb stopped on one specific rivet in the corner. It felt exactly like the others, but it lacked the decades of accumulated grime. It wasn't a rivet, it was a concealed, tension-loaded locking pin. Arthur grabbed a pair of heavy pliers from his belt. He gripped the rounded head of the fake rivet, pushed it inward with all his remaining strength, and twisted it in quarter turn to the left. A loud, heavy metallic clack echoed through the quiet garage. The entire interior floor of the crate shifted, and the heavy wooden false bottom dropped down by a fraction of an inch, revealing a dark, hidden compartment beneath the iron mods. Arthur's heart was pounding against his ribs, but his hands were completely steady. He carefully slid his pry bar into the narrow gap created by the released locking pin and gently lifted. The heavy false wooden bottom groaned, resisting for a moment before finally lifting away. Arthur set the heavy wooden panel aside and looked down to the hidden compartment. He didn't find stacks of loose, dusty cash. What he found was exactly what a man of his profession would call canned capital. Assets specifically chosen by an expert because they would never lose their value, no matter what happened to the economy or the paper dollar. He reached into the dark space and carefully pulled out a series of heavy bundles wrapped into protective, anti-tarnish cloths. He laid the first bundle on his wooden workbench and slowly peeled back the fabric. Inside was a breathtaking, complete professional silver service set from the 1890s. There were massive, ornate silver serving trays and heavy ceremonial pieces. Arthur didn't need a magnifying glass to know what he was looking at. He turned the heaviest tray over and ran his thumbs across the bottom. There, stamped perfectly into the metal, was the hallmark of a master silversmith and the undeniable mark of pure sterling. This wasn't standard dining ware. This was a custom commissioned set that had once belonged to one of the wealthiest founding families of Philadelphia. He reached back into the compartment and pulled out a heavy leather-bound case. When he unlatched the brass fittings and opened the lid, he found exactly 12 pocket watches resting in individual vacuum-sealed compartments, but these weren't ordinary train conductor watches. Arthur picked up one. It was a solid gold Vetron Constantine. He carefully popped the back casing open. To anyone else, it was just a piece of old jewelry, but to Arthur, looking at the microscopic, perfectly balanced gears and the flawless ruby bearings, it was an absolute masterpiece of mechanical engineering. The inside of the gold case bore a beautiful hand-engraved dedication from a century ago. They were flawless works of art, preserved in absolute perfection. Wow, this is something very serious and something very worthy, and I hope in the end it brings him a lot of money. Finally, Arthur reached into the very deepest corner of the hidden floor and pulled out a heavy canvas bag. It was small, but it weighed over 30 pounds. He untied the thick drawstring and looked inside. The bag was filled to the brim with brilliant, uncirculated American silver eagle coins. It was the ultimate, undisputed safety net, solid, heavy, government-minted silver bullion tucked away by the previous owner from the absolute worst-case scenario. Because Arthur was a master of his trade, he knew exactly how the real world worked. He did not pack these incredible treasures into the trunk of his car and drive down to local pawn shop. He knew a pawn shop would instantly take 70% of the true value just to make a quick flip. Instead, Arthur walked into his kitchen, picked up his phone, and called an old apprentice of his, a young man Arthur had taught to drill safes 20 years ago, who was now a senior appraiser at a prestigious auction house in the city. The appraiser drove straight to Arthur's dusty garage that very afternoon. When he saw the 1980s silver set laid out on the workbench, he was absolutely speechless. He treated Arthur with his deep, unwavering respect that a student owes their master. They handled the liquidation properly and professionally. The historical silver set was carefully packed up and entered into an exclusive private auction specifically for high-end antique collectors. The heavy bag of silver eagles was sold directly to a licensed precious metals exchange at the exact spot price of silver, but Arthur kept the 12 pocket watches in his garage for just a few days longer. He didn't sell them right away. Instead, he sat at his old workbench, set up his bright magnifying lamp, and pulled out his delicate, precious precision tools. He spent 3 quiet evenings carefully opening each watch, applying microscopic drops of synthetic oil, and performing light preventative maintenance. For the first time in years, Arthur felt the profound, sweet thrill of working with complex, beautiful machinery. He wasn't just an old man struggling to pay the groceries. He was a master craftsman bringing history back to life. When he was finished, the watches were sent to an auction house, fitting perfectly. The entire process took months of quiet patience. But when the final gavel fell, the collectors had paid their premiums and the government taxes and auction fees were officially deducted. The final pure profit transferred into Arthur's bank account was exactly $92,000. That's amazing. On a warm evening in June of 2026, Arthur walked up the steps to his daughter Emily's small house and sat down on the front porch. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a heavy official manila envelope on the small patio table. Emily came out of the front door looking exhausted from her first shift of the day. She looked at her father, then looked at the envelope. She opened it and pulled out a stack of official documents from her daughter's medical college. Clipped to the very front was a payment receipt from the bursar's office. $40,000 had been deposited directly into a locked educational trust. Her daughter's medical school tuition was completely paid for in full for the next 4 years. Emily dropped the papers on the table. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute shock. She looked at Arthur. She didn't ask how he did it, and she didn't ask where the money came from. She just walked over, wrapped her arms tightly around her father's shoulders, and buried her face in his jacket, weeping quietly. Arthur patted her hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a certified bank check for $20,000. He placed it gently in Emily's hand. He looked his daughter in the eye and told her, with a voice full of quiet authority, that she was going to march into her second job tomorrow morning, hand in her resignation, and finally get some rest. Arthur didn't buy himself sport cards or a luxury vacation with the rest of the money. He used the remaining funds for a new start. He signed a lease on a small, well-lit metal workshop on the edge of town. He bought a few solid workbenches and a good set of tools. He started a small community program, taking in young local kids who needed a direction in life, and began teaching them quiet, disciplined art of metalworking and historical restoration. Sitting on the porch, holding his daughter, Arthur finally realized the truth. He was no longer a jammed, broken log. He was exactly what he had always been, a man who opens doors to a better life. When asked about the incredible day in the dusty storage facility, Arthur just smiles, his steady hands resting on his knees. People look at an old, rusted iron box and they think that's just dead weight. That's garbage, Arthur says quietly. But when I looked at it, I saw someone's entire lived life just waiting for someone who can actually know how to appreciate it. My profession taught me a very simple truth. The most valuable things in this world are always locked away the tightest, but there's absolutely no lock on earth that won't open, as long as you have the right key and a dedicated pair of hands. That's it. That's the story. Please drop a comment, share your impression of the story. If you have your own to share, please do. And if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and see you next time. Bye.